In February of 2022, Russian forces crossed the Ukrainian border, causing a war that is affecting not only the people of Ukraine and Russia, but also scores of people around the world. In this video, part 2 in our series in understanding the Russo-Ukrainian War, we explain why Russia attacked Ukraine and show what the rest of the world is doing about it. Be sure to check out part 1 in our series where we identify the historical relationship between the two countries and the recent tensions that led to war. As we all hope for peace, let's take a look at this horrible event and pray for those most affected, the innocent victims of Ukraine.
Wake up, get up, stretch my legs.
The reasons behind the Russian attack are complicated and can be broken down into 3 main causes. While much of the rest of the world does not condone the attack on Ukraine, Russia did have their reasons. And it's important to understand Russia's reasons if we really want to truly understand the war. The reasons behind the Russian attack are complicated and can be broken down into 3 main causes, and we will explore each, starting with Vladimir Putin and his belief that he does not see Ukraine as a legitimate country.
A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, drink some water.
Though the Soviet Union fell apart in 1991, some in Russia, and most importantly Vladimir Putin, have always seen their neighbor Ukraine as a land and people that are rightfully theirs, even historically calling the people of Ukraine Little Russians, in no small part because of their shared history dating back to the Kievan Rus in the 9th century. Putin justified his attack on Ukraine in a June 2022 meeting with young Russian entrepreneurs by comparing himself to former Russian monarch Peter the Great, who came to power in the late 17th century and waged the 21-year Great Northern War with Sweden. In the conflict, the Russians took land, including the area that became the city of St. Petersburg. Putin explained to the audience that when Peter the Great founded the new capital of St. Petersburg, none of the European countries recognized this territory as part of Russia. Everyone recognized it as part of Sweden. He shared that he believed Peter the Great was justified in the action as returning and reinforcing land he believed was rightfully Russian. Comparing himself to the legendary Russian monarch, Putin believes that his attack on Ukraine is legitimate as an action of returning and reinforcing Ukrainian loyalty to Russia, despite the clear objections of the Ukrainian people. In simple terms, Russia held influence and control over Ukraine for a very long time and feels it has the right to continue that control. Missing in Putin's version of history is that the Ukrainians voted overwhelmingly for independence in 1991, and the majority of Ukrainians want to leave the influence of Russia to closer align with Western Europe by joining NATO and the European Union, the Cold War rivals of the Russians. In the eyes of Putin, illegitimate countries along their border don't get to make that choice. That leads us straight into the next reason: Russian fear of NATO and the European Union. During the Cold War that spanned much of the second half of the 20th century, there were 2 competing military alliances in Europe and North America that influenced much of the rest of the world. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, known as NATO, was made up of Western Europe, Canada, and the United States. Much of Eastern Europe made up the Soviet-controlled Warsaw Pact. While the Soviet Union did not have complete control over the other countries, they acted as a buffer zone between the Soviet Union and their Western rivals. In the years since the fall of the Soviet Union and the dissolving of the Warsaw Pact, Russian strength and power has decreased, while NATO still exists and continues to grow in strength and in member states. Most concerning to the Russians is NATO expansion into the former Warsaw Pact countries and even former Soviet states, with Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary joining the NATO alliance in 1999. Bulgaria, Romania, and Slovakia, along with former Soviet states Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania joining in 2004, and Albania joining in 2009. NATO, which was created for mutual protection from enemies, including the Soviet Union, already borders Russia by the way of former Soviet Baltic states Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. From the Russian perspective, NATO's movement into former Warsaw Pact members and even Soviet states is an act of aggression. Putin sees movement into lands such as Ukraine, which the Russians see as rightfully theirs, as a direct threat to Russian security, a step taken too far. In the years following the breakup of the USSR, some of the new countries established enjoyed CSTO, their own military alliance with Russia and European nations Belarus and Armenia. Wanting to be neutral between the two powers, Ukraine joined with Moldova, Georgia, and Azerbaijan to form the Guam Group. which was also seen as an attempt to counter Russian influence in the region. But with Ukraine's neutrality, they were still a buffer between CSTO and NATO. But in the eyes of the Russian government, if Ukraine were to join NATO, a much larger and more difficult to defend border would be created between Russia and NATO. So Ukraine siding with Russia, or at least its neutrality, is important to Russia and the CSTO since they view NATO as a hostile aggressor. Many in the West rightfully believe that it should be decided by Ukraine regarding who they are aligned with. But from the Russian perspective, Ukraine flipping to an alliance that was mainly formed to act as a defense against them would endanger Russian national security. There are other considerations for Putin as Ukraine fights to remain independent, such as Ukraine's natural resources.
New shoes on a Friday morning. New look, still can't hide my born. I got a pocket full of change-ups.
If Ukraine were to join NATO, the alliance would then have the many resources Ukraine provides and would put the alliance close to many of Russia's own most valuable resources, specifically their massive oil reserves. The Russian border with Ukraine is within 300 kilometers of the Russian city of Volgograd, which controls the Volga River, the main route Russians use to secure oil from their reserves in the Caspian Sea. The Russians also want to keep Ukraine from joining NATO or the European Union due to the untapped resources that are currently in Ukraine. While the Russian economy is smaller than many of their rivals, and similar in size to secondary world influencer Brazil, they are still a major world supplier of energy resources, specifically oil and gas. Russia is the second largest producing country in the world in oil and the number one exporter of natural gas. Money made from energy makes up 50% of the Russian government's budget and 30% of their national GDP. The money made from energy is the very reason for the success of modern Russia, along with the influence and power they still hold in the world. It's important to understand the control a petro-nation such as Russia has on the world, especially as they sell energy to other nations of the world. In Russia's case, much of the European Union are buyers of Russian energy. A future problem to that financial relationship came in 2012 when it was discovered that within Ukraine's zone of the Black Sea may contain massive amounts of natural gas near the Crimean Peninsula. That, along with new technologies allowing the drilling of natural gas deposits in the east or the west, and all of a sudden, the Ukraine became one of the largest holders of untapped natural gas holders in the world. Only they didn't have the money or technology to untap it. Enter the large Western gas companies such as Getty and Shell, who were let in by the Ukrainian government. With successful drilling, Ukraine could become Europe's second supplier of natural gas and a financial rival to Russia. If Ukraine joined NATO and the EU, it could potentially rival and even cut off Russia's sale of natural gas to Europe, resulting in a death blow to the Russian economy. Russia claimed much of the Ukrainian source of untapped gas in 2014 with their annexation of Crimea. Ukraine in turn responded by closing up a canal from the Dnieper River to Crimea, cutting off over 80% of the peninsula's freshwater source. The people of Crimea suffer as Ukraine won it back and Russia refuses to release it. Another reason is many of Russia's pipelines to Europe ran through Ukraine, forcing them to pay billions in tariffs to their former Soviet comrades. Russia has spent much to divert the pipeline, such as the creation of Nord Stream and South Stream, but still worry about the prospective natural gas fields in the Black Sea near the Crimean Peninsula. Those resources would be a huge benefit to the EU and NATO, which could spell doom for the Russians. Putin understands this and will not allow Crimea to rejoin Ukraine. If I were to summarize Russia's reasons for attacking Ukraine, they are doing so to unite what they believe is a Russian land and people with the rest of Russia, to keep Ukraine from becoming an energy-selling rival to them, and to continue to force Ukraine to act as a buffer from NATO, whether the Ukrainian people want it or not. And finally, despite not sending soldiers, Ukraine is getting more help from the West as the war continues, leading us to the second major question asked in this video. What are other countries in the world doing to help Ukraine?
Count up the loot, call up the troops.
Due to Ukraine not being a member of NATO and not wanting to start a nuclear war, the NATO countries, including the United States, Canada, and much of Europe, have denounced Russia's action but will not commit to sending their militaries to help Ukraine. But help has come from much of the world in the form of military, financial, and humanitarian aid. More than 60 countries have sent at least some form of aid, with 31 countries giving military aid at the time of this research. The amount ranging from Montenegro sending bulletproof vests and helmets to some other countries such as the United Kingdom, the United States, Portugal, Canada, and Germany giving so much more. and the US has pledged to give Ukraine $40 billion in aid as of the creation of this video. By sending aid and not soldiers, much of the Western world is doing what they can to help Ukraine, striking a balance between helping Ukrainians repel the Russian forces without risking a larger war with Russia. 25 of the nations sending military assistance to Ukraine are NATO members and are supplying Kyiv with conventional weapons as well as more advanced equipment and weaponry. The weapons include artillery, anti-aircraft weapons, anti-tank weapons, armored vehicles, reconnaissance and attack drones, helicopters, small arms, ammunition, and body armor. Another major part of the efforts to stop Russia's invasion include the many sanctions or penalties imposed by one country on another put on Russia's economy, limiting their ability to pay for the war in Ukraine. In the effort to end Russian aggression, Western countries have targeted wealthy Russians, banks, businesses, and state-owned enterprises in an effort to weaken Russia's economy. The sanctions have made it difficult for Russia to pay back its debts, in part by freezing their bank accounts. Major Russian banks have been removed from the international financial messaging system SWIFT, which will delay payments to Russia for its oil and gas exports, essential pieces of the Russian economy and government budget. Many of the West sanctions have targeted Russia's valuable oil and energy exports. The European Union intends to ban all imports of oil brought in by sea from Russia by the end of 2022. The United States is banning all oil and gas imports from Russia, and the United Kingdom pledges to phase out Russian oil imports by the end of 2022. Germany has frozen plans for the opening of the much-anticipated Nord Stream pipeline from Russia, a major hit to the Russian economy considering Germany is the largest buyer of Russian energy. Western countries have sanctioned more than 1,000 Russian oligarchs and businesses, considered close to the Kremlin, creating instability among the Russian elite. Much of the West has also issued bans on Russian air flights, Russian gold, the sale of luxury goods to Russia, with a number of international companies such as McDonald's, Coca-Cola, and Starbucks withdrawing from the world's largest country. A deep recession is expected, and Russia's economy is expected to shrink by 10% in 2022. The moral of the story is the West is doing what they can to help Ukraine prop itself up against a global power in Russia. Will it be enough to protect Ukrainian independence? Our next episode, we will explore what will most likely result from the Russo-Ukrainian War. But in the meantime, we share our love, hopes, and prayers with the victims of Ukraine and pray for a peaceful solution. Will the Western world be able to continue to help the Ukrainian government survive, or will all of the Western efforts result in nothing? We will share those opinions in the third installment of our series, in which we identify how the war has impacted the global community and what will happen in the war between Russia and Ukraine. Thank you for watching as we discover how this war will ultimately affect the landscape of our global community.